Welcome back to Vuln Vibes. In this deep dive, we are going to talk about critical IBM Maximo flaw.
Hmm. Okay, so when a CVE drops with a CVSS score basically kissing 10,
Yeah.
9.8 in this case, you know it's serious.
Oh, yeah. 9.8 is pretty much DEFCON 1 for vulnerability management.
Exactly. We're looking at CVE 2025-36386, and this isn't just a minor bug, it's hitting IBM Maximo Application Suite, or MAS, specifically the Maximo Manage part, but only when it's integrated with the standalone Cognos Analytics setup.
Right. And the hook is it's unauthenticated, 0 credentials need to get in.
Which leads straight to potentially sensitive enterprise data. So our mission today, break down this vector, understand the data risk, and really stress the urgency on patching. Let's start with that score, that 9.8. It screams maximum urgency. Why? Because it implies low attack complexity.
Meaning it's easy to pull off.
Relatively, yes.
Yeah.
And crucially, no privilege is required, no user interaction needed. It's remote and it's unauthenticated. That's the nightmare combo. We're talking a fundamental breakdown of the security boundary.
Okay, so scope. You mentioned it's specific to Maximo Manage within MAS using that standalone Cognos integration.
Correct. It's not every Maximo setup,
Yeah.
but specifically that configuration where Manage talks to a separate Cognos instance. The vulnerability lives in that connection.
And IBM's advisory points a finger directly at something called MXCSP, Maximo Cognos Service Provider. For our audience, many running these complex enterprise systems, what does MXCSP actually do? Why is its failure so critical?
Right. So think of MXCSP as like a specialized security gateway or a broker. It sits between Maximo and Cognos. In these big setups, you don't just pass passwords around. You pass trust tokens, session information. MXCSP is supposed to validate that trust.
So it checks if the user logged into Maximo is legitimately allowed to see stuff in Cognos.
Exactly. It takes the session info from Maximo, validates it, and then sets up an authenticated session over in Cognos for that user. It's the doorman verifying your credentials between the two systems.
Okay, so if MXCSP is the doorman, a 9.8 vulnerability implies the doorman is, well, letting people sneak in without checking IDs.
That's a good analogy. The flaw isn't like picking the lock. It's exploiting a flaw in the doorman's process for checking IDs.
Let's get technical. A 9.8 usually means something fundamental is broken. How does an attacker actually trick MXCSP? Is it sending malformed data or...
It seems to be more about exploiting the logic. The advisory suggests the way MXCSP handles certain requests during that integration call. It could be manipulated to just skip the credential validation step entirely.
Skip it. Wow.
Yeah. So think about internal service-to-service communication. Sometimes those paths have, let's say, trusted assumptions built in. An attacker likely crafts a specific request. Maybe it spoofs a header or a parameter that MXCSP expects from a trusted internal source.
And MXCSP accepts it without double-checking with the main identity system.
Precisely. It's exploiting that assumed trust between Maximo and the MXCSP layer. The attacker doesn't need a password, doesn't need a token. They just need to send the right kind of malformed request to the vulnerable endpoint.
And suddenly they have a valid, authenticated session inside Cognos.
Bingo. It's a failure of that trust boundary. That integration point becomes an open door.
And let's remind ourselves what Maximo manages. This isn't just website analytics.
No, absolutely not. We're talking industrial control environments, manufacturing operations, huge enterprise asset management systems.
So the data flowing into Cognos here is critical stuff. Operational tech data, maintenance schedules, maybe supply chain info, asset health.
The crown jewels for many of these organizations, the data Cognos is visualizing is often core operational intelligence.
Okay, so that brings us to risk. What happens after the attacker bypasses authentication via MXCSP? What can they actually do inside Cognos?
Right. The immediate impact is pretty severe. First, unrestricted access to whatever dashboards and reports are available through that Cognos instance.
So immediate data leak potential, confidentiality breach.
Massive. Think maintenance costs, operational efficiency metrics, potentially proprietary process data, all exposed.
The advisory also mentioned data alteration. That sounds even scarier. How realistic is that?
Very realistic, unfortunately. Once you have an authenticated session, especially if it lands you with elevated privileges, which is often the case with service-level compromises,
Yeah.
you're not just a reader. Cognos can be configured with write-back capabilities or allow modification of report parameters, datasets.
So an attacker could potentially poison the data, feed bad information back into other systems.
Exactly. Imagine altering maintenance reports to hide critical failures or changing inventory levels in a connected ERP system by manipulating the Cognos data source or reports. It moves beyond spying to active sabotage or disruption.
Okay, this is where it gets really complex for the security pros listening. The chaining potential. An unauthenticated session in Cognos. That feels like just the beginning.
It absolutely is. Think of it as establishing a beachhead, a foothold inside the trusted network perimeter.
Because Cognos doesn't just talk to Maximo, right? It often pulls data from lots of places.
Precisely. In large enterprises, Cognos is often the central reporting hub. It might connect to the Maximo database, sure, but also ERP systems, HR databases, supply chain management tools, maybe even OT data historians.
So the attacker lands in Cognos via the Maximo flaw.
Yeah.
And then uses Cognos itself to pivot.
That's the huge risk, lateral movement. Once they control a session within Cognos, they can start probing all those other data sources that Cognos has legitimate access credentials for.
Can you give a concrete example? What's the next hop?
Okay, say the attacker gains admin-level access in Cognos. They could potentially modify an existing data source connection, maybe change the query slightly to pull back more sensitive tables from a connected finance database than the report usually accesses.
Or use Cognos' own functions to move data out.
Yes, like configuring a scheduled report to output sensitive data and email it, or FTP it, to an external address they control. They're using Cognos' own legitimate functionality for exfiltration.
So that MXCSP failure effectively bypasses any network segmentation meant to protect those backend systems, because the attack is now coming from a trusted internal source, Cognos.
You've got it. The scope creep is enormous. What started as a Maximo vulnerability could end up compromising critical financial data, HR records, supply chain forecasts, anything Cognos touches.
That failure of segregation where the visualization tool becomes the attack platform, that's a serious architectural lesson here.
It really underscores the risk in these complex integrated systems.
All right, time for the practical advice. Teams need to act fast. What specific versions are vulnerable?
Okay, listen up if you're running MAS. There are two main branches affected. First, MAS versions 9.0.0 all the way through 9.0.15. This corresponds to Maximo Manage versions 9.0.0 up to 9.01.0.
Okay, the 9.0.
Right. Second, the newer branch, MAS 9.1.0 through 9.1.4. That covers Maximo Manage versions 9.1.0 up to 9.1.4.
And the key condition is using Manage with that standalone Cognos integration within those version ranges.
Correct. If that describes your setup, you are vulnerable right now.
Remediation. Is it a complex workaround or a straightforward patch?
Thankfully, IBM has treated this with the urgency it deserves. It's a direct patch. They've released fixes via Fix Central updates for both the 9.0 and 9.1 MAS branches.
No messing around with config changes or firewall rules, just patch.
Given it's an authentication bypass at the core integration layer, patching is really the only reliable fix. Workarounds would likely be complex and potentially incomplete. IBM's guidance is clear.
Apply the Fix Central update.
And the timeline is immediate.
Absolutely immediate. With a 9.8 unauthenticated RCE-like vulnerability, you have to assume exploit development is happening if not already done. Every hour you wait is an hour you're potentially exposed.
Don't walk, run to Fix Central.
Pretty much. Delaying this patch is essentially leaving the door wide open to your critical operational data. So pulling this all together, this IBM Maximo flaw CVE-2025-36386 is a stark reminder about the risks lurking in integration layers, especially when you connect high-value systems like Maximo to powerful tools like Cognos using things like federated authentication or service providers like MXCSP.
Exactly. That trust mechanism, that handshake, has to be absolutely bulletproof. When it fails like this, the consequences are severe.
It really highlights how a single point of failure in an integration component can undermine a whole lot of other security controls.
And that brings us to the final thought for everyone listening, especially the architects. Okay, you'll patch this specific CVE, but what's the bigger lesson? How rigorously are you hardening all your service provider endpoints, the ones handling SSO, federation, API gateway authentication?
It's a question about threat modeling those connections, isn't it? Not just the applications themselves.
Precisely. How solid is the trust model for data moving between your critical systems? Can one component be tricked into vouching for an unauthenticated actor? That's the challenge to take away from this. Ensure your entire integration fabric is resilient, not just the individual applications it connects. You need to model the trust relationships themselves as potential attack surfaces.